Hello, hello. Welcome to tonight's Ask the Expert with Amanda Owens. And I am so excited to have her join us tonight. But we all know how Facebook is, and it gets a little glitchy, and things have changed on Facebook's end. And so we're having some trouble adding her to be on screen together. So I'm going to introduce her here in this video. And then Amanda is going to go live by herself in a second video. So watch for Amanda's live video. And she's going to go live and share all about social skills. And she's got a great game that you can use at home called the Communications Game to introduce social skills to your kids and do it in a fun way and to practice those things so that you can communicate well as a family and communicate well when you're out and about and doing all the fun things that you're going to do this summer and moving forward. So I'm so excited to have Amanda with us, and she's going to pop in and share all about the communications game, what are social skills, and all kinds of other stuff. So give her a warm welcome.
All right, wonderful. Social skills, and a little bit about me. I am a homeschool graduate. I went Christian school, public school, and then, hi, Miss Michelle. And then I went homeschool from 8th grade on. And for me personally, just a little bit of background, it was the best thing that could have happened for my social skills. I know that a lot of times we homeschoolers get asked that eternal infernal question, like, well, how are they going to socialize? But as many of us know, it's actually a blessing and an opportunity to socialize in some really wonderful, beautiful ways that maybe public schoolers don't have the chance to, Christian schoolers don't have the chance to, and I feel like a living testament of that. So I'm very, very appreciative of the homeschooling world, especially in regards to social language. But just a little bit about that term, social skills versus social language, and why I would bring social language up. Good. I'm so glad. You were looking forward to this too. Great, Kristen. I'm so glad you're here. I am a speech language pathologist. I've been a speech language pathologist for the past 10 years, and actually in speech language pathology terms, that's a good amount of time. A lot of us have a habit of marrying dentists or surgeons and getting out of the field and having babies and becoming wonderful stay-at-home moms, which is great. But I have 10 years in the field, and I have a lot of that centered around pediatrics. I've been working with children from a wide variety of backgrounds, and one of the things that a speech language pathologist does is work on social language. And social skills and social language are a little bit different, which we're going to talk about in a little while. But as the world goes, there are experts in different things, and the ones that are experts in social language and actually fix it when it's not necessarily working correctly, or when there is and I'm using quotey fingers because my idea of working correctly is very different than others, which we'll also get to. But when there is a difference, usually the person people go to is a speech language pathologist when there's a difference in social language, which we'll talk about. But like I said, I'm a homeschool graduate and mom, so this is perfect. It's social language, it's homeschooling. This talk is going to be great. And when we originally had chatted together, Miss Cynthia, she had a few questions that she really felt on her heart would be great for you guys to get answered. And one of them was, what are social skills? What? Like, very obvious, big answer here, question here. What are social skills? And I would bring up, well, what's social language versus social skills? Because I think by talking about the two different things, you're going to have a better chance of understanding what they are. So to me, social skills are, if there's an iceberg and there's a tip that's on the top of the iceberg, the part that you see, that can be like social skills or functional behavior, how you interact with the world around you in a relational sense. And social skills are a lot of times these social constructs that are made up by cultures. For instance, the fact that my husband would be totally weirded out if I followed him 5 steps behind, but if we were in a different culture, if I didn't follow 5 steps behind, that would cause some marital strife, to say the least. Personal space is different in some countries. In some countries, if you stand far back, it's almost disrespectful. In other countries, you get too close, honey, you might be in Texas, and they may not like that very well. Certain different cultures like their space. Some people talk a whole lot with their hands, like me. And then when I was in college and spent a lot of time in the American Sign Language groups in my college, including a lot of members of the deaf community, they were like, girl, you have got to stop. You've got to stop talking with your hands. It's like you're shouting all the time. So, there's a whole bunch of different things that are wrapped up into social skills, but a lot of it is social construct. Those ideas of what's appropriate to say when. It's the meaning that we attribute to something for the same reason that this is high in some cultures, but in other cultures, you'd want to shake a hand, etc. So social skills, those are those unwritten rules of a culture that give us guidelines of how we're supposed to interact. But social language is how you understand your ability to kind of parse out and naturally absorb and observe those social skills. That ability to read a room, that ability to read a social situation and quantify it either in words or in actions, and then be able to follow through with it. And that is something entirely different. And I'm sure you can imagine, well, if you don't have the bottom of the iceberg, the social language, how hard is it going to be to develop the social language, that top construct stuff, right? It has to have a foundation, and that's what I would say social language is, and that's where speech language pathologists come in. But there's a lot of cool things that you can do at home, which we'll get to here in a bit. If you want to learn about typical social language, I really have to recommend the American Speech and Hearing Association, so asha.org, ASHA.org. I will always be really good at spelling it because that's the name of one of my bridesmaids and family, but asha.org. Just type up social language or pragmatic language and see what comes up. They have lots of guidelines, including guidelines by age, on what are some things that are typical and what might be a social skill, that cultural construct, versus what might be a social language foundational skill that maybe needs to have a perspective on it in order to grow, if that's the goal. And then I have 2 really great downloads that I love, and I will be linking these all below. I'll be linking the asha.org and then Laura Mai's SLP. One of the things that Ms. Cynthia talked about was how she said when she went from preschool to elementary school, grade school with her children, she felt like, I had a great toolbox, and all of a sudden it's changed. Like, I need something different. And Laura Mize, the speech language pathologist, a lot of her stuff is really, really young. She's gotten famous for teaching toddlers how to talk, and she has those 11 essential skills that you should see before a child starts using word, before we start expecting words out of them. They should have those underlying skills. But I really love that printout and those resources at a variety of ages, because I have found that while working with children in elementary ages and even beyond, sometimes they'll have great functional words, but there'll be something missing in that social language piece where it's not an area of strength for them, it's an area for growth. And when that is the case, and they're sitting there trying to figure out, man, why is this so much easier for all of my friends than it is for me? I go, well, dude, let's go back to the 11 essential skills. Let's take a look at what are some areas we could get stronger in. And sure enough, sometimes there will be a couple of those areas where if we brush those up, all of a sudden it just makes learning social skills a little bit easier, because those 11 essential skills, when you're working with a smart child, a lot of times they can compensate. But the other one that I really like is a hierarchy of social language and executive functioning skills. And it goes from like 0 to like teenagers. And it is so neat because it talks about different milestones in executive functioning and in social language and how those can sometimes connect. You may have heard of a concept called theory of mind, or that ability to realize that a person next to you would have thoughts, and then you have thoughts, and their thoughts are equally complex and potentially incredibly different than your own, but they both exist and can exist at the same time. It's not just the ideas in your head that are the only ideas. And that hierarchy talks about when those theory of mind skills, those should be starting to show themselves. It also talks about how often you usually expect a child to initiate communication, as well as a bunch of different things. Obviously, you'll have to take it with a grain of salt because every child is a little bit different, but I love how they connect social language with executive functioning. So that's a really good one. But then also you got to look at cultural differences, because in our Western culture, we expect people to participate and talk a lot like I do. But in other cultures, that might not be the expectation. The expectation might be that a child should be seen and not heard until they're, 13 or 17, 18. So all those different things. But did you know, and some of you may know, obviously, because outside the box kids, you can have a social language disorder. You can have a social language disorder that is separate from autism spectrum disorders. You can have a social language disorder that's just kind of on its own thing. So it's very, very interesting how that can work out, and how a lot of folks might not appreciate it. They might just think, oh, just a child, they just don't have social skills, so they must be homeschooled. Well, maybe they have a social language disorder. You never know. So very, very good. Oh, okay. I'm seeing a lot of good stuff in here. I will answer those questions at the end, Miss Diana, so I can give you some more thoughts. That deserves a little bit more time. So next thought. Miss Cynthia asked the question, we model good behavior at home. Isn't that the same thing? And I would say not really. Good behavior is good behavior. It's fantastic. There's social skills and politeness markers. Those are wonderful. My kids, they get those drilled into them pretty hardcore because I love having really polite kids. I like having the only kids at church that call any adult Mr. or Mrs. whatever their last name is. That was the way I was raised. It makes me feel more comfortable, and also it has served me really well to be the person that the professors go, wow, they still call me Professor Smith instead of John. It's just an interesting tool to have in your toolbox, and I like it being pretty much reflexive for me. They can make those own decisions as they get older. But really, in general, good behavior is different. You can, without getting too much into my beliefs here, you can have good behavior and not necessarily have social skills. You can have good behavior and do the right thing, even on top of that. Have good character, good morals, and right actions without necessarily having social skills or social language. We can all think of that time where our child has been incredibly, impeccably honest and said something that maybe ruffled a few feathers out of earnestness and honesty and not one hint of malice or rudeness. It just was just like a tree is a tree. So I think we can all agree when we think of it that way that social roles are a little bit different than social language, and also different from good behavior. Social language, when we're looking at social language versus social rules or social skills, social language is the how and the why. So the why do we shake hands rather than high five when we meet somebody or bow? Versus social rules, it's what we do. It's the mechanics, not necessarily the purpose. And so I think that's definitely important. What would a high five be if we hadn't assigned the meaning of a high five. If a high five didn't mean yay, that was awesome, you would just be slapping somebody on their hand. Weird, right? So it's all about the meaning that we assign to it. And children who have difficulties with social language, they often will have difficulty with their ability to tell the how or the why people do different things. And sometimes they're really good at coping and they're able to adhere to the social rules, but they don't really know the why. So that's always very interesting. So the next part, I would like to show you this game, and I don't know that I can do it with the sharing screen, because the last time I tried to share a screen on Facebook, it cut me off. So I think what I'll do is, just in case that's going to happen, I will wait to show you the conversation game until the very end, because if it cuts me off, I'll just start a new video, another video, and I will do it as a shared screen so that you can see it, because it's colorful, it's pretty, it's fun, and I have great plans for that for you guys. All right, let's see. But I will tell you just a couple more fun things. All right. Some other great games, beside the one that I'm going to show you today, some other great games for social language. The Ungame. The Ungame. It was, I think, written by Charles Dobson's group, but it has both secular and Christian versions. And you take turns asking each other questions, and it is a cooperative game. There is no end. I've known many people who just like put the board game part aside because it can be very distracting and it's not particularly fun. But those cards, they are great conversation starters. They're not just like topics like talk about a dinosaur. Like they're a little bit more in depth without being too weighty, and there's different levels of cards, so that's a good one. Another one that I really like is called Outburst. You've probably seen it, but did you know that Outburst can be good for flexible thinking, figurative language, reading a room, etc. Outburst can be used for a lot of different things, which I really love about it. Guess Who? That simple childlike game can be used for doing theory of mind and perspective shifting. So thinking about somebody thinking about something else while you're and wondering what they're thinking about, what you're thinking about, those kinds of things. It's really great with that. I really love this one. I've used this in my house. There's a moose in the house. It's super cute. And they give you ideas for initiating with a script, and I've actually created more script to the game in order to use it as almost like a therapy activity in my own home, because I have very painfully shy children, and then I have some children that have difficulty with initiating certain types of conversation, so I love that. Oh yeah, I love those games, Cynthia. They're so good. And it's so interesting. I love game schoolers because there are so many times where I'll see what they're doing and I'm like, oh yeah, it's good for that, but did you know it does this for you cognitively as well? Like, yeah, it's great for math, but it's also good for this type of like front brain process. Okay. So the next one, so there's a moose in the house. It has you initiate with scripts. When you place a card, there is a script that matches. And that is just such a great, I don't want to say desensitization activity, because that almost sounds like, you just need to get over it. But it gives you the opportunity to, at your level, and in my house, we have both motions, like there's a moose in your house. And slam, when you slam the door down on a room so the moose can't go in the room. There's a bunch of different ones. It's pretty cool. But that can give them something to latch onto, something for them to feel a little bit more comfortable with. But then, because of the way the game works with the cards, you don't know what you're going to have. It also has a little bit of that spontaneity. So It's a good one. Yes, there's a moose in a house. I love game right games in general. Sleeping Queens, I have thoughts about that one too, but we won't just talk about them forever. Another game right game that I really love for that is Forbidden Island. There's also Forbidden Desert, Forbidden whatever. There's a bunch of different ones. This is more for the older kids. Cooperation, compromise. You could let your child, who of course is going to be way smarter than you playing this game, just because young kids always are. I'm just waiting for my 8-year-old to trash me on a game, but you could let them just completely rule the roost and like just tell you what to do while you're playing the game. But if you give them just enough kickback, oh well, I don't know if I want to go and move to that part. Are you sure that I should use my helicopter lift right now? Maybe I should save it for later. And get them talking and using the collaboration, the cooperation, and the compromise, that teamwork towards a group plan, which we'll be talking about social thinking in just a minute. It is just fantastic for that. It is just fantastic for that. And I love it. I love it for that. Let's see. Another thing that Miss Cynthia wanted to talk about was naming emotions and reactions. And I will admit, I am not incredibly well versed with the social thinking, because usually when I get children, they are incredibly well equipped with the social thinking curriculum, and then I take them from there. And one of my favorite things to do is to generalize them into using those things internally as strategies. Instead of necessarily having that externally, because by the time the child is in 8th grade, he doesn't want to be sitting there going, I wonder what Superflex would think. Like, I mean, he might think that in his head, but he probably won't want to say it out loud. And so, just giving them other tools to navigate. I love growing kids up with that. So that's a lot of fun for me. But group plan, thoughts and feelings, flexible thinking. If you've never seen Superflex and His Friends, if you've never seen Social Thinking by Michelle Garcia Winner, I want to let you know that there's a little bit of controversy on it right now. There are speech language pathologists who are screaming from the rooftops that it is incredibly controlling, it is incredibly ableist. And as a person whose circle of friends was primarily neurodiverse growing up, and honestly it's probably a 50-50 mix now, just because my husband's friends are a lot more typical than my friends. I don't like throwing babies out with the bathwater, especially when my friends tell me that they love having tools in the toolbox, because just because they speak English, why can't they learn French? Like, why can't they have another language to use? Like, why limit them? Thank you very much. And I would agree. It's very pleasant. It's very playful. I love the storybooks. They are so, so good. And they're so easy to grow up. Like I was talking about, one of my favorite things to do is to take those strategies in social thinking and help a child grow them up. Things like group plan, taking them from the books and the movies and doing group plans while playing Hungry Hungry Hippos to doing group plan while playing euchre. So those kinds of things, talking about thoughts and feelings, talking about flexible thinking, and that can go stretch from the youngest ages all the way on up. Just wonderful stuff. The best thing about it is the fact that it gives words for abstract concepts. It gives visuals for abstract concepts. It gives stories and reference points that are concrete for abstract concepts. And it gives a common language for people to talk about them. I love it. Love it, love it. Yes, Superflex spoke my kids' language of superheroes and bad guys. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that can be so incredibly equipping for a child to have something that's relatable and imaginative. And what I love, it uses creativity and imagination to teach social creativity and imagination. It uses abstracts in a concrete way to teach abstracts in a concrete way. It's so meta. I love it. Very, very cool. All right. Very good. She also asked about tips for helping quirky kids be successful when they're out in their community. And I could give all sorts of like little one-off tips, but I think the structure that I love people to think about is a little bit like a sandwich. And sandwiches are just delicious, but sandwiches in therapy are incredibly helpful. Just like in your teaching pedagogy, when you're teaching things, a lot of times you pre-teach, you facilitate, and you post-teach. You pre-teach, you facilitate, and you post-teach. And so what that could look like is when your child is going to Lego Club at the library and they're a second or a third grader, you pre-teach, hey, you know what? There's going to be a lot of Legos there. Those will be really fun to play with, right? And then your child goes, yeah, I love Legos. Legos are great. And you can say, yeah, when they're there, there's going to be a lot of kids too. Just let it sit for a second. There's going to be a lot of kids, and they're all going to want to play with the same Legos. What do you think could happen? And you lead them through different concepts. I like to do one concept at a time. Just talking with them either, a couple days beforehand, on the ride there. Eventually you'll need less and less pre-teaching for concepts that are more and more familiar, more and more independent. Pre-teach those common language that your child is going to need. For instance, hey, my name is Amanda. What's your name? If you want to play with them, those kids that you're going to meet at the library Legos, you could ask them, do you want to build with me? Yeah, you could ask them, do you want to build with me? And if you ask them, do you want to build with me? They might say yes. And then you could build with each other. Pre-teach. And then during the Lego group, you'd facilitate. So obviously giving space. But if they come up to you and they go, they are not playing with me, and say, oh, did you say, do you want to build with me? And then facilitate. If they say, oh, I did, and they said no, and you go, oh, well, if I remember right, you got to get a yes. So do you want to build with me? Oh, you didn't get a yes? Oh, what could you do? And then they might remember, oh, back to my pre-teach. You said if they said no, I could ask somebody else. Oh, you could do that. And then see if they'll go do that on their own. At all just different levels, facilitating as much as you need to and as little as you can. And then post-teach afterwards, talking about it. Oh, I love how you went up to that kid in the red shirt, because, kids never remember anybody's names. And you might say, you went up to that kid with a red shirt and you said, do you want to build with me? And when he said no, you went and asked the kid in the blue shirt and he built a giant rocket ship with you. That was so cool. That kind of post-teach, like a debrief, if you will. So that's one of the things that I really love for helping quirky kids to be successful. My mom didn't realize she was doing that. It was definitely not in a therapeutic way, but she would do that where she would go, okay, you're going to go to the cashier at Kroger and you're going to give her this $5 bill and you're going to buy the milk by yourself. And then I'd come out and she'd be like, that wasn't so bad, was it? Not quite post-teach, but you know what I mean. That kind of format gives them something to expect. They know an event is coming up. They are used to pre-teach, facilitate, post-teach, and then they start eventually someday doing it for themselves. But anyway, I could talk about that for forever. Oh, yes. I'm glad this is so helpful, Miss Michelle. This is something that I feel so many kids struggle with. And it does not have to be any kid with any diagnosis. I think just kids in general, more and more, we need to be taught these things. Social language is so complicated. And our interactions, we need this. We just need this. So awesome. And the other thing that I really like for this kind of topic is kind of related. Cynthia brought it up. Tips for siblings of quirky kids and being hurt unintentionally by siblings' social actions. So if you have a child who unintentionally hurts your other child because of a social action that was not expected, how do you deal with that? Pre-teach, facilitate, post-teach, and honesty. I really like honesty in that. I like to validate by not hiding away issues. So, and when people say issues, they think, oh, issues. Issues, just like issue is a thing you can talk about. We could even say topics. If one child comes up to my other child and goes, I have no idea what he's talking about, I'll go, I know, baby, he's really hard to understand sometimes. Our little buddy, he's working on his speech sounds, and sometimes he wants to talk to you so bad, but he just can't. Instead of going, oh, it's all right, it's fine, it's fine. Well, he just wants this. We're not going to cover up everything. We talk about it straight up in very plain terms. And you can do that with social language and social skills as well. And I think that can give that moment to teach compassion and consideration and, in a way, facilitation. My oldest child facilitates for my youngest children at this point. He's been therapized so much that he does that. And I really appreciate it because that honesty, it honors the fact that we all have different patterns of strengths. We all have different areas for growth. We all have differences. We all have similarities. And when you talk about it like it's gravity, when it's a tree that just happens to be a tree, you keep it very positive, neutral, it makes you go, oh, yeah, so-and-so is like that. You know, at this moment, they did this thing, and it made me feel really sad. I had uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And it makes me not want to play with them very much, and that's understandable. But I could still play with them because I think they're learning, and maybe if I help them, they could learn this, and maybe they won't hurt me again. Like those kinds of things where you talk about it in very, very plain terms for children. I think that's incredibly important, and it's daunting as the parent where you're like, oh, I have to facilitate this. How do I not misstep? But your effort is kind of the important part. Your children will see that effort, they'll honor that effort, and you can even talk about how, oh, mommy thought he meant this, but baby, I think I'm actually wrong, and I think he meant this other thing. I am so sorry. That happens in my house all the time. All the time. So this is the conversation game. And it is something I'm pretty stoked about. So a little bit of nostalgia here. I made the conversation game, the first rendition I did, while I was working at St. Vincent's Pediatrics in Indianapolis. And I did it as a graduate extern. It was a fun experience, and they were like, oh my goodness, you came up with it? Like, I'm such a nerd. I ended up finding out at my next externship that there was already a game very similar to this, but I've added so many as to how the game can be played, because that's the kind of flexible scatterplot thinker I am, that I'm definitely one where I think of bazillion different ways to do things while I'm doing it. And I have included in this one particular way to play just because it can get really complicated if you play it all the different ways. And I have found that the best way to start to play is with comments and questions only. And that is the rule set that I have included with this game. I will eventually be sharing other rule sets once this becomes a little bit more familiar. So you pick a deck, and there are some beautifully colored decks here, as well as some gray scale ones, just to make it a little bit easier on us mamas who only have black and white printers at home. That won't be me. But you have questions, the exclamations, and the comments, and then the blank cards in a variety of colors. Obviously, some of these are definitely black and white printer friendly. There's 3 sets of cards that are, and then there's 2 colors. But you pick a deck. Each person has their own deck. That is entirely one color. Then you pick a topic, and you can either do that verbally. Let's say you say, we are going to talk about dinosaurs. And you take cards from your hand, which is your entire deck, and you take turns making comments and asking questions. And as you make a comment, Every time you say a sentence, or like I like to call them with our little language learners, a story, a short story, then you place that card, the appropriate card, either the comment or the question, on the conversation pile. And the key is to keep it in order. When you place or when you do a comment, let's say it's something like, let's do an example here. I love dinosaurs. It's a great way to start a topic, right? I love dinosaurs. And you'd put one of these comment cards down on the conversation pile and on top of the topic, and it would start that conversation. Then the next player has a chance to ask a question. And the beauty of this is when you have a comment, when you have a question, you place it. You don't have to take turns in order, just like an organic conversation, but you'll see why this is important later. And you can play it both ways. Well, let's say, mom comes in with the purple cards, because I always play purple whenever possible, and she says, what kind of dinosaur is your favorite? And she places one of these question mark cards on top. And so suddenly you have a comment from your kiddo and a question from you. And you go back and forth, and maybe they comment that in return to your question, I love stegosauruses. Stegosauruses are amazing. And you tell them, okay, that's 2 comments. Go ahead and put those down. You use your whisper voice, because your whisper voice is not your communication, your conversation voice. Your whisper voice is the narrator voice. It's the aside. It's the Jiminy Cricket in their head whenever it's needed. It's that buddy that they can rely on. And it gives them a chance to kind of practice that in independence. And then you end up going back and forth, and you get to the end of your conversation, and your child has done a whole bunch of comments, you've done a whole bunch of questions, and either somebody runs out of cards or out of words to share. Then you take the conversation pile and you place it in the order of the conversation in a line or grid. And it's adorable. Usually when I first talk to a child and I use the conversation game, there's like 3 to 5 cards, and you're like, oh, we just put this in a line. That was a good conversation. And you say, you asked 3 questions this time. I am so proud of you. I asked 3 questions, whatever. You talk about what you see. Do you remember when you asked me if I like Tyrannosaurus Rexes too? And I said, yes, I do. Oh, that was such a good conversation. I love that we talk about that again sometime. And it gives them visualization. And you can ask your child these questions. You can ask each other these questions. Do the colors take turns? Did one color ask all the questions, or did everybody ask questions? Mommy ran out of all of her question cards, but you didn't use any of yours. Purple must ask a lot more questions. So it gives a little bit of a buffer when you talk about it as if it's the colors. Obviously, my children who really, really struggle with social language, to the point where they don't necessarily have that understanding of theory of mind, etc. We talk about, hey, you asked 3 questions. I did this, and we keep it just you and them instead of the colors. But eventually, you have to start placing it in a grid, or across the living room floor, which I've done before. And it gives you a chance to talk about how long the conversation was, and visually it can orient. And I have done this. I know that one mom, I think it was Miss Lisa, asked about, can you do this with that kind of DIY games? Oh man, there are so many good DIY games. But and just in general in life, play pretend with your child. I really encourage that. If they're pretending to be a Tyrannosaurus, congratulations, you are now a pterodactyl, or whatever they would like you to be, or whatever you would like to be if you're trying to teach them collaboration and compromise. Pretend to be that other kid that you would like for them to be able to play on the playground. Give them that chance to view, because you're a very safe environment, because you love them. but I've used post-it notes where we just do a simple question comment. We we draw on. You got a plain one, you got one with a mark. The ones with a mark are the question marks, and stick them to a wall. And all of a sudden, that conversation is on a wall, giant, huge in front of you, and you can go back and forth and talk to them in that way about the conversation that was just had. It's just a great way to visualize conversations, because conversations are a lot. They're a lot, and they're incredibly hard to visualize unless you give it a visual. So that's a good way too. Very, very simple game. I will eventually be sharing the rule sets for the exclamation points. Other cards that will come in eventually, but for now it is just in that basic form, ready to be used. I really appreciate you guys' enthusiasm. You are parents that care about your baby so, so much, and that communicates, that translates even without words. So Diana Annette, you asked, are you familiar with Gestalt language and thinking? How would you go about using that type of processing in your work, or advice for parents at home? So my thoughts about Gestalt language is not something that I have had formal training in, and a lot of speech language pathologists now are getting quite particular about like having special background training in it. I have worked with a lot of children that later were would have been diagnosed or labeled as Gestalt language and thinking users. But I have found a lot of times when I've used those 11 essential skills and some of the things that I do with children, they're just as likely to grow as simplistic as that sounds. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, but when you realize that a child recognizes patterns and utilizes those very, very strongly, it can be helpful when you start to recognize patterns too, and start giving them something to depend on. So I mean, that's just a big, big, big question. I don't know if I could, yeah. Just in general, teach what a child doesn't have, and celebrate their strengths. That again, totally simplistic. I might have to come back and do another one on it. If I start talking, I will never stop. So I will have to hold myself back. Miss Cynthia, I think I'm basically asking to come back and talk about Gestalt. It's also something that I need to learn more about the specific terms and language of, because I've worked with children, but then things go differently. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to stop. While I'm not talking about it. And when you play and always get, I don't know, how do you move kids' ability to answer those questions? Yes. Oh, I love that. How do we know which issue is causing the I don't know? Oh, man, Miss Diana, you ask questions that I could go on forever, but I'm not going to do that to you guys because we're already getting close to that 45-minute mark. So you have to get to know the child, which bonus points, your parent, so there's going to be aspects that you're already going to know, and then you need to objectively distance yourself and observe, so that you can start noticing patterns, and then set up like your own mini experiments. Not like you're experimenting your child in a weird way, but you think of yourself as on an investigative journey where you are trying to observe different things. And what a speech language pathologist does is they will oftentimes set up a play environment. And I don't just mean like they set up certain toys and whatever. I actually am a bagless therapist. Whenever I go into people's homes, I do not bring toys. I want to use their environment so that parents know what to use within their environment, because they already have it there. I like to start with where they're at. I get completely cozy in their environment, and I observe, and I just try different things, see how they respond. Try different things, see how they respond until I set up the right environment. And the environment could just be the conversation, the script that we're going back and forth with, until I see the pattern of what are the holes that are missing. And sometimes that takes time. I remember, speaking of Gestalt, it might be Gestalt. I'm homeschooled and I've only ever read it. I've actually never heard it spoken. Homeschooled is my excuse, but it's actually quite true. But I was working with a child who would come up to people, no eye contact, and say, "Do you want this opened? Do you need help? Can I open your juice box for you?" The script that they had learned was that phrase that their communication partner would usually initiate the exchange with. So their thought was that's how that script goes. Their concept of language was so scripted that they hadn't realized that there were different roles within the script. It was just one script that played out. And what I would do was observe and observe and observe, and finally it clicked. That's the part that's missing. And so what I started doing was recasting with that purpose in mind. So repeating what they said, but better, as in more accurately. So the child would come up to me, say, "Do you need help?" And I'd go, "I need help." And then he'd be like, "Do you need help?" "I need help. I need help opening this juice box." And I didn't give eye contact because then it would be a communication exchange between me and them versus just kind of being their Jiminy Cricket inside voice. And then eventually he just started smiling. He doesn't look at me. He just goes, "I need help with this jukebox." And I picked up the juice box, put it in and go, "Yeah, I would love to help you with your juice box, dude. There you go." He went off like he had won the lottery and Thomas the Train lived at his house. It was the best thing ever. And I remember his teacher literally shedding tears because she was like, "He's been doing that for this last year, ever since he went verbal. He just couldn't perspective shift." And that started that train going. That little buddy, that next year was very exciting for him because he learned that concept in that moment. You found that hole and you filled that gap, and he just took it and run with it. It was great. So I don't know how to tell you how to know what your "I don't know" in your house means, because it could be different for every single child. But the method in which to get to that point is to observe, take objective notes. No kidding, I hate journaling, but that could be really helpful for you. And maybe get outside perspective on that. Very good. Yes, and I would agree. Forbidden Island, cooperative game for older kids. Yes, yes, yes. Lisa, would you have any suggestions for DIY or low-cost games? It may be hard sometimes for us outside the U.S. to get some of the ones you mentioned. I would agree. There are some really good ones, though, that are German makers. I will take a peek at those and maybe put some links in there. There's some that are expensive here that are great over there. So I'll take a peek at some of those. The conversation game, you can make it yourself. Eventually I'll be selling it on my website, but you can make it yourself. Honestly, I've played it with plain decks of cards. Heck, I've played it with Post-it notes for my kids who come from religious backgrounds that are not comfortable with cards because their parents would not be comfortable with cards. Good. Michelle, I am so glad that was helpful, and your teenager struggles with these skills. I love the Superflex stuff, and she's getting older and older stuff, which is really, really helpful. I actually have on order a bunch of things for that middle school to older range because I've had to just kind of make up stuff on my own. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what she has in that arena. If you want to find me, I'll just talk about this while I'm doing this just to save us some time. You can find me at www.illuminatecommunicate.com. I actually am pretty full right now with one-on-one families, but I do run a support group. And that way you'll hear about any openings that I have eventually once licensure opens up across the United States. I think there's 22 states in an interstate compact that will allow me to have licensing in like a lot of states, obviously.